Nüüd aga, kui minna teise tänase ettekande poolaja juurde, siis I am absolutely pleased to welcome Mr. Rickard Falkvinge, who finally arrived from Sweden. I hope not with Estonian ear, but with SAS. And he's also a person who doesn't need too much introduction, has been nominated far more powerful in Sweden than anybody else in this room. And yeah, I am actually impressed with working in next door with Mr. Engström, who is a member of Swedish Pirate Party, as I understand you are as well. So please, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Tarand. Thank you for inviting me to beautiful Tallinn. I actually have a vacation booked here in about a month, so if anybody has any tips of what I should see, I'm happy to hear them. And I'm a bit sorry for being so late in. I couldn't really help the flight being late. Anyway, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to speak a little bit about the copyright industry and trying to take a bird's eye view of what's happening rather than focusing entirely on the minute details of ACTA. A quick introduction before we start. How many here use Twitter right now? A couple, okay. So I'm Falkvinge on Twitter. I like seeing my name bashed, criticized, and generally taunted while doing presentations. So I founded the Pirate Party in 2006. To sum us up, we like the net, we like copying and sharing, and we like civil liberties. Some people called us pirates for that, and rather than hunching down and becoming discouraged, we decided to stand tall about it. As a result, we now have 2 seats in the European Parliament, where we are happy to be part of the Green Group. We have established ourselves in just over 50 countries, and the most remarkable development right now is that we're polling at between 7 and 9% in Germany, the German Piratenpartei. And I'm not sure that the copyright industry quite expected that to happen. Going to today's presentation, the copyright industry in a larger perspective, we are going to talk about 4 pieces here. We're going to look at how all of this has happened before, a little closer look at the last century and policy developments, goals of public policy making, and fourth, what does this have to do with fundamental rights, and why are we seeing these youth rallies? When I speak to sociologists about the net, I get a very strong impression that they divide into 2 groups. The first group claims that the net is the largest invention of mankind, or the most disruptive invention of mankind, since the printing press 500 years ago. The second group disagrees with this and claims that rather the net is the most disruptive and largest invention of mankind since the written language 6,000 years ago. So it is, in other words, it is quite to be expected. Oh, there's a little notification there. Never mind that. So in other words, it's quite expected that we're going to live in a time of confusion for a while as to what rules really do apply. In retrospect, it is obvious that we shouldn't have banned the printing press. It was good for all society. In retrospect, it's obvious that libraries were good for mankind. Knowledge spread. It grew the economy, grew jobs. But it wasn't as obvious when that debate happened. As the printing press came on stage in 1453, the Catholic Church had a monopoly on culture and knowledge. Whatever the church said was true pretty much by the state or the church saying it. They had the role of the newspapers. The preach would tell the village what was true and what wasn't. And all of a sudden, right, you had books. They were hideously expensive. A single Bible would need hundreds of skins, not to mention the monks' time in copying them. All of a sudden, you had a printing press which just disrupted the entire economy of culture and knowledge, where you needed a permission to read the Bible. All of a sudden, a cartload of Bibles arrived in the streets of Paris, and they were in French. The Catholic Church absolutely panicked, and they demanded stiffer and stiffer punishment for unauthorized copying. After all, how shall the monks get paid if you use a printing press? There really isn't anything new under the sun. So, what happened was that usage of the printing press got steeper and steeper penalties until, in France, on January 13, 1535, it reached the death penalty. Even the death penalty against unauthorized copying didn't help. Once people had learned what it meant to share knowledge, to share culture, there really was no going back. You couldn't unlearn that experience, nor can we do so today. The United Kingdom, I was about to say, but it wasn't united then. England, seeing the utter failure of France's crackdown on the printing press, took a different route. Instead, the Queen there, Queen Mary I, who wanted to turn England back into Catholicism from her father's conversion to the Church of England, she decided to forge an unholy alliance with the London Printing Guild, the London Company of Stationers, as it was called, in exchange for getting to censor and pre-approve anything printed in the entire kingdom. The London Company of Stationers would get an exclusive monopoly on printing in England. This monopoly was awarded on May 4, 1557, and it was called copyright, and it is still around, as opposed to Queen Mary I, who died on the following year. So, there really isn't anything new under the sun. All of this has happened before. And what we learn is a red line through history is that powerful people use their power to keep their power. If you can dictate what is true and what is false, then you don't need to worry about any laws ever going against your interest. You have the most important power in all of society. If I'm able to speak for all of the audience in here and say, we love bacon, then we are going to have bacon at tomorrow's breakfast, and I get my bacon. Today, with the net, though, you're able to object and claim and say that, no, I'm a vegetarian, I don't like bacon. This presents a problem for me because I do. So, there's a very, very strong conflict now with gatekeepers being thrown out of this privilege. I'm absolutely astounded, fascinated by the Internet's equalizing power. For the first time in history, a 9-year-old schoolgirl in Paraguay who's got her first laptop under the One Laptop Per Child program, for the first time in history, her voice carries the same weight as mine, a middle-aged white male in the rich parts of Europe. And I think that's absolutely fantastic and something that we should be really proud of. But there is an elite Let's take a look at the last century of the copyright industry. They've been claiming that the sky is falling. Music is coming to an end. Books are going to end. Nobody's going to write books anymore. No more movies are going to be produced. These claims have been made about every 5 to 10 years in the light of new technologies. And looking at which technologies would bring about the end of culture, the end of civilization, We start with the self-playing piano in 1905. Gramophone would be the end of a vivid, songful humanity, end quote. Broadcast radio would bring an absolute end to writing music, and loudspeakers, as they entered cinemas, would lead to people not talking to one another, just going to a robot and ordering their ticket. Television would bring an absolute end to movies, because who would go to a cinema to see a movie if you could see it for free at home? And in the next decade, cable television was the enemy, because it was very unfair that the copyright industry's free content was unable to compete with paid. The photocopier would bring the end of books. Loudspeakers in the 1970s again would bring the end of culture, as live music in were replaced by DJs and remixes. And somewhere at this point, the copyright industry learned to demand money. They demanded, in the 1970s, they demanded a disco fee that would be paid by every establishment paying disco music, rather than having live music. We can laugh quite heartily at this today, but that laughter kind of sticks in your throat as you realize that this disco fee was actually introduced, and it still exists. The cassette tapes, same thing there. Home taping is killing music, as the dead Kennedy added. We left this side blank so you can help on the B-side of their tape. Same thing there. Levies were introduced. Blank tapes were taxed. Money went to the copyright industry, and the net effect was that small, struggling bands who were paying for blank tapes to make mixtapes were paying an obscurity tax to the rich and famous. Page 2. Video cassette recorder. Jack Valenti, then chairman of the Motion Picture Industry Association of America. The video cassette recorder is to the motion picture industry as the Woman Home Alone is to Jack the Ripper, or Bosso Strangler, I think it was. Of course it wasn't. It was a perfect revenue stream. But still, they got their money. They got another levy. Digital audio cassette was an utter failure, because the copyright industry meddled legislatively in the technical design of a new medium. They attacked the first MP3 player, the Diamond Rio. The MP3 player eventually prevailed, but they didn't recover from the burden of defending against the music industry, so they went bankrupt. What we today tend to call iPods. The internet, cloud-based music, it goes on. And television, again, they wanted to legislatively interfere with the design of high-definition television. They've learned a very successful formula. Throw tantrums, get taxpayer money. They've been trained and trained and trained and conditioned in this very straightforward connection for the past 100 years. And I think it's time to reverse that connection. So, looking at public policy, if we look at culture policy, knowledge policy, what would be reasonable goals? I would, just to put a couple of bullet points, I would add cultural diversity. Europe is very diverse from a cultural standpoint, and I think that's something we should cherish and safeguard. Access to knowledge and culture. This discussion went with the libraries 150 years ago as well. If people have access to knowledge, we climb the value chain, we get new jobs, we get much, much better leverage in terms of production. Which, of course, brings us to economy. At the end of the day, policymaking is about economy, and therefore also jobs. So these 4 points, I think, should be considered when looking at a cultural policy. Cultural diversity. Well, you've had a copyright industry who have been deciding who should not see the light of day since basically the 1950s. They have a business model that depends heavily on scarcity and therefore a hefty premium on a per unit copy of culture. when it comes to access to knowledge and culture, you can't even buy pieces of culture in the quality you expect and that you get from the Pirate Bay today. This industry is so shooting itself in the foot and crying for legislative protection when what they are really up against is a major supply problem that is only their own fault. This exact same discussion happens when public libraries came in the UK in 1849. The publishers then claimed that you can't allow people to read books for free without paying for them. No author is going to be able to make a living off of writing books. Nobody will write a book ever again if you open a public library. And as we know, no books have indeed been written after 1850 when the first public library opened. Either that or that argument is utterly bogus. Now, at the end of the day, though, the copyright monopoly, for it is a commercial distribution monopoly, has absolutely nothing to do with morals. This is a trade war initiated by Pfizer in early 1980s, so that ties again into the last presentation. There is no reason why Estonia and Europe should legislate that we should send our money to the United States and Japan, who are the winners of on the current system. If we are taking responsibility when we make policy for our own citizens first, and I think that's our responsibility to do so, then we should weaken these structures because we do not gain from them. Finally, jobs. The copyright industry claim that they represent 7% of the gross domestic product. These are numbers from the UK, but you'll see them frequently. However, when you look at what these 7% consist of, you'll see advertising business, you'll see theater performances, you'll see things that are actually inhibited by the copyright monopoly. So in reality, it's about one-fourth of those 7%. What's interesting is when you look at how much of the economy is inhibited by the copyright monopoly, and we start looking at major parts of the IT sector, the communication sector, of construction, and many, many different sectors, and we arrive at about 71%. Now, these numbers come from Sweden, but Estonia is also a technologically very advanced country, so they should translate at least in a comparative scale. So, ending with a number from McKinsey here. The copyright industry complains about lost jobs. Yeah, that is what happens when you're an obsolete industry that don't add value anymore. So, according to McKinsey, for every job that disappears in the copyright industry, we gain between 2.4 and 2.6 jobs in other industry, notably IT. So if you care about cultural access, if you care about cultural diversity, if you care about the economy of Estonia and Europe, and if you care about jobs, then quite notably, what the copyright industry demands is a very effective counter-indicator of sound public policy. Ending with fundamental rights. The copyright monopoly depends on a division of roles that doesn't exist anymore. You got the right, the publisher, the reviewer, the distributor, and the reader. These have been modeled. There is no clear line. And as a result, you can't enforce the copyright monopoly without starting to heavily regulate conversation itself. This is why you're seeing youth rallying for freedom of speech across Europe and the world right now, in particular in ACTA contexts. And many politicians, in particular elder politicians, are very puzzled about this. Like in what? Freedom of speech. We have that. Well, we don't. When you go to Google and search for something, and you see at the bottom of the line that X number of search results we had to censor from this list because of legal requirements. When the youths of that today sees that, they are terrified, and they are angered, and quite justifiably so. In the eyes of the net generation, the copyright industry is threatening freedom of speech. And as a policymaker, I have to say that a commercial distribution monopoly should not even be considered being weighed or balanced against such fundamental liberties. And we've also been letting the copyright industry pull this entirely the wrong way against less freedom of speech. Now, for example, with ACTA. ACTA cements the current state of the patent monopolies, of the copyright monopolies, and seeing that sociologists say that we live in a time that is as disruptive as the advent of the printing press or even the written language, I think it's a terrible mistake to cement what we had previously rather than examining all the wondrous opportunities that this new equalizer gives us. This is why we're seeing rallies. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, questions, counter arguments? Yes, see.
Thank you for a very interesting and inspiring speech. Askar Alas, Estonian Eesti Ekspress newspaper. I think, well, I don't think it's bad or criminal if I share content, song or something with my friend. Even though if I do it publicly, I think it's criminal offense still. But if I share with 200 people or 1,000 people, is it a different story? Is this already piracy? Or should we draw somewhere this line from where it's one thing is normal sharing and at some point it becomes piracy? Do you think there is some kind of line or that we should draw? Thank you.
Now, talking about what is criminal and what isn't doesn't really make sense in terms of a policy-making perspective, since we are the ones who determine what is criminal. So you'd need to see what is positive for society and what has a negative net effect. And realizing that the only way to enforce the copyright monopoly today is to eavesdrop on people's private conversations. If I'm in a chat channel with everybody here and I drop a video clip there, then the only way to catch me doing that is to eavesdrop on all the ones and zeros leaving my computer and yours. So out goes the postal secret, out goes the reporter's right to protect their sources. And I think those mechanisms are much, much more important than a distribution monopoly for entertainment. So I adamantly argue that the copyright monopoly must, at a minimum, be reduced to when there is intent to profit. You can regulate trade, but the instant you start regulating speech and private communication, then you're venturing into very, very dangerous territory.
Leah Hanni, E-Governance Academy. I'm interested, what is the position of Swedish government in regard of ACTA? Is there a debate going on in your country about the issue? Thank you.
The Swedish government, with the aid of the Swedish government is currently led by the center-right coalition, and it's a minority government. Together with the Social Democrats, they have a majority for saying basically absolutely nothing about ACTA. They do not take interviews. They do not want any kind of public debate. They are not sending in quotes to newspapers or anything like that. They are trying to just muzzle it up completely. And of course, we are doing the exact opposite. So there is, from the government, there is no debate. There is no position. Sweden signed the ACTA in Japan through its ambassador, and that's more or less everything we've heard. Under the radar, though, we can see that a lot of this is driven from inside the Justice Department, from civil servants who have very, very strong ties to the copyright industry. So a lot of the problem is that it's being driven by civil servants rather than by politicians who take responsibility for the fundamental rights.
But may I ask a question? What is your plan? Do you see that this kind of international agreement like ACTA should be presented to the Parliament, or we are okay with the method that parliaments are not any more needed?
Well, that's two very interesting questions. First, what I think about ACTA, the one key thing is that I don't like the phrase counterfeiting and piracy. Fake medicines that kill people is a completely different policy matter than teenagers sharing music, and they should not be treated by the same law. If you do, you will get very, very bad results. Counterfeiting is one thing, piracy is entirely another. The second thing, I think, is that it is of utmost importance that democratic institutions, such as parliaments, are involved from the get-go when it comes to treaties that risk our fundamental liberties and freedom of speech. That this is able to go on in corporate backrooms, I think it's very alarming, and I think it's kind of a shame, a veil of shame to what it says about our society, that they can actually pull this off.
David? Okay, it has been said that no questions are in pipeline,
Thank
so
you
thank you very
for
much.
your attention.